Am I allowed to make comments on your videos?
Sure.
Hashtag not MK5. Man, what a badass shop.
Suspension setup. I did not bring you here to record the Corvette.
You gave the camera to the wrong person. I'm still hurting right now.
How do you communicate with him? Hi, today we're going to take apart Yosani's engine. He had a brief moment of glory with over 1,000 wheel horsepower with a stock long block. It's a JDM Aristo long block that has been fitted with, enough airflow to make a lot of power. And shortly thereafter, it kicked the rod out. So it's got a broken stock rod, so the block is garbage. We hope the head is okay. We're going to go ahead and take it apart today with him and kind of discuss the life and death of the engine. So what turbo is on this engine?
7685. Jan 1. So it made in 2015 we were pushing over 900. It lasted. I don't beat on it hard, but it's like a weekend car and type of thing.
Yep.
So back in 2017, I went back for a little more, upgraded injectors, and we went to the 7685 and the dyno 1015. So I lasted it out for 2 years for a decent amount. Like I said, it was happy, it wasn't crazy. So this time around, I went back to kind of for the record.
Right.
So that's when we made the 11.6. We made 3 pulls.
Did it break on a gear change? Or did it break
No,
when
I
you
made
went
up the
off the
high
gas?
of 4th gear, all the way on top. Like I stayed at 4th gear, kind of crossing the line.
Okay, so it broke when you let off the gas?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird, they break when you release the stress,
Okay.
and they break when you make a gear change. You'll push the clutch in at the end of the run, and it'll break right then. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like right when I don't want to cross the line.
Yeah, turbos are pretty, if you look at it from a crank angle standpoint compared to a nitrous engine,
Okay.
the stress is spread out over more crank angle. So you'll generally get away with much more power and torque with a turbo because it's more of a gentle push on the rotator.
Yeah.
Versus nitrous is just kind of an explosion. Well, it is an explosion. So I think nitrous is like 7 degrees of crank angle,
Okay.
and the pressure burst of the turbocharger is like 17 degrees. So there's a lot more time to distribute the stress.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing engine though, that you could make, if the tuning is good, you can make 800 or 900 horsepower for
Easy.
a long time.
And I will say this on record, I had I can say hundreds of emails already, messages all over social media asking, oh, what did you do? I wouldn't recommend it. Once you're over that 700, 750 torque range, just keep it there.
Yeah. Well, you also had a mature tuner.
Yes.
He's, we talked about this, the Pedro, the guy's been at it for a long time.
Yeah, I know Nance probably since I was like 10 or 11 years old to my ex girlfriend.
Yeah.
She's the one that got me into supers.
Right on.
So, yeah.
No, when I was young and got my first Supra, I would hear about Toyomoto.
Yeah.
Because there were back then there were few people that were doing it.
Yeah.
And there were even less guys that were established doing it.
Yeah.
I was kind of like every other just person, and I bought an AEM and just started trying to figure it out.
I remember
the
that
long road.
with Eddie when it was still the ASC VPC combo. The high injector get to the stoplight, turn off. It even got to you remember the old Y2K turbos?
Yeah.
He ran one of those with a big, hole out the hood.
Yeah.
The Baltic Super is actually Danny's Super. Now, Danny Roll?
Yep.
Yeah, that's his Super.
That it's pretty. I don't know if I would say embarrassing, but it's it's wild to think that something like that Y2K turbo, how it stacks up to today.
Yeah. No.
I mean, a 7675 is an incredible piece of hardware compared to the old stuff.
Yep.
The old stuff, it's like you're lucky to make 700 on some of that old stuff.
Yep.
And that's post on-center housings. The on-center housings were the worst. Just you can't get the air out of them.
Yeah. Just different times, man. Probably like 20 years now.
Yeah, it's just evolution. But the spoils of technology are present because this is an example of the spoils of technology. You know, you said I can have access to what? And you just keep turning the knob.
Yeah, no, hey, and honestly, I'm a big fan of Lance. If he gives me the okay, he says it's happy there, I go what he says. If he says stop at 800, we'll stop at 800.
Well, he's not trying to make a name.
Yeah.
He's trying to preserve. He's smart. He's a mature person. The guys that when they first get into this, there's a lot of swinging for the fences to try to make a
make a name and
yeah. Lance is a good dude. I like him.
Quiet, doesn't always keeps to himself. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not an egomaniac.
Yep.
He's just a guy that knows what he knows.
Yep.
It's some people have a feel for it and some people don't. I've seen technicians that will just break a bolt off and they say, it's like, well, how did that feel? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Their wrists are not calibrated very well. Years ago, I had a customer that he would just drive around at high RPM because he liked the sound. And I didn't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until I rode with him, it never dawned on me that somebody would just do that, you know? But he literally would just drive around at 6,500 RPM because he enjoyed the sound. So it's hard to define normal.
That's true.
Right? What's normal?
Oh man.
That's true.
Yeah, man. It's
Likes to do on edge.
Yeah.
If you tell a guy with a decade-old comb over that it's not normal, he'll argue with you. It's normal to him.
Man.
If it's DVTI, something like a 6466 would just be super magical. It would be a lot of fun all the time.
Tell me the truth.
This is where it's at, man.
Yeah. Where did we hit it?
Well, it was in the wrong spot because it had turned.
Yeah.
And the valves were hitting it. But you can see that the valve was kind of chomping at the piston right here.
Yeah.
Looks like the pin bore has removed itself because the pin bore is still sitting down here at the bottom of the bore. The piston's up top, so the piston is separated. But yeah, you can see, we see how the carbon is present here, but it's all sheared away and clean around this chamber. This is from the piston hitting the head. So one of the risks you get when the rod breaks is that the piston can slam into the head and ruin it. And when you go to surface the head, you'll get an area that's actually higher than the combustion chamber was because of the blunt force trauma of the piston smashing into the cylinder head at a super high rate of speed. moves the material. This little ridge, you can feel it right here where the pistons feed into it.
Yeah.
Right after this head surfaced, you have to make the decision if the seats are still concentric. If you go to cut the seat and the cutter's not touching this area here, you know that the head's changed shape enough that you have to back away from it because it will fail at a later date. But if the seat cuts well, and you have good witness of the cutter, then you'll do a small surface to the head, and you may leave this area the way it is rather than take more material off the head, because at some point you have to understand that some damage is going to be present, but it's just cosmetic.
Yeah.
It's like a guy will get a brand new set of pistons and put it on the bench and scratch it. And then pick it up and think that it's damaged. Well, it's just cosmetic, right? So you may have some cosmetic damage left in this chamber. As long as the seat cuts well, you'll just let that be and move on. There's not enough non-VVTI JZ heads laying around the planet right now to just to throw one away over cosmetic damage. And you can see on the face of these valves where they hit the piston, and it's because the piston was now turned, so the valve reliefs were not lined up. And because the piston isn't going up and down in the bore anymore because the rod's broken, the valve just keeps. It's on there pretty good.
Recently got put in there.
What's that?
It recently got put in there.
Well, yeah, but then it recently broke a rod. I mean, you have to think about that.
Yeah.
During that period of time, the amount, during the engine rotating to a stop with all that going wrong. You see all these marks, all this vibration. There's something special happened here, but there's a lot of marks. It looks like just dents and dings. It's from the parts chattering against each other. And if you look on the nose of the crank, not this corrosion, because the corrosion is just corrosion. But if you look at the vibration on the snout of the crank where the damper was, if you drag your fingernail across this area, it's rough because that thing's been shaken. What's the noises? Letting go.
Yeah.
There's some connecting rod. So you have piston, circlip, piston, some of the skirt, more skirt, and just a bunch of piston hanging out. There's some blunt force trauma to the windage tray.
What is this called? This tray here?
Yeah, I would call it. It's not an ideal windage tray, but that's what it's there for, to try to keep oil from splashing away from the pickup. You'll see it on cars like these cars. Drag racing these cars, once you get in the 120 range, if you're logging oil pressure at any sort of reasonable rate, the oil will actually go up in the back of the engine and the oil pressure goes down.
When you're like squatting on the car?
Yep. So that's last week there's a guy sending me all these pictures of broken parts, and then I get a log, and you get to see the oil pressures dropping worse and worse every run when he lets go of the trench brake. It's one of the many things that dry sump fixes. Oil cooler, it's an oil heater also. So there's coolant running through it, warming the oil up, and there's coolant running through it, stabilizing the temperature as the engine heats up. Yeah. No, it's one of the things I really appreciate about Pedro is his authenticity. There's a certain amount he wants to know, and a certain amount he just doesn't want to know. Because once you start to educate yourself on this stuff, like it may take some of the fun away because then you know better.
Yeah.
When you don't know any better, it's easy to just have the party. Once you start to learn this stuff, you're like, ooh, that's how that happens. You're like, ish. I don't know if I want to do that again. Luis, you want to sing the Frozen song?
Good till you watch a movie a lot, huh?
Oh man,
How old is your daughter?
She's 3.
Right on the money.
We've moved into Trolls.
I got a 3-year-old too.
The Trolls are pretty good though because that Frozen movie has a pretty twisted message in it.
It does,
And like
right?
there's romance and drama. And it's like, no man, just let the kid have a little fun before he has to join the world. And the Trolls thing is just this big, non-discriminating party. I like the Troll stuff a lot more than the Frozen.
Mine's like, I watched the Cars movie I don't know how many times. Cars, Buzz Lightyear, Toy Story.
Yeah, I love Cars, right?
I try to be pretty easy on my kid because she's only 3, but she keeps calling my Datsun a Porsche because it has round headlights.
Oh,
And I said, baby, this is insulting, okay? I spent my Porsche money on you.
oh, man.
One of the signs of a cap that has been moving is that it's loose. So
Okay.
there's in on these engines, it seems to be number 5 is always the first one to come loose. But see how this is still tight in the saddle.
Yeah.
This is tight in the saddle. This one's coming up. This one will come up. This one is just along for the ride. So you'll have the most amount of movement in that tight cap. And we're not going to reuse the crank, so don't tell me on the internet I shouldn't be laying that there. It's going to be okay. But the tight caps, they still have a good spot in their saddle. They should have less marks in the main saddle than the ones that are wiggling around.
That smells pretty.
Smells pretty seasoned.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of gross.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the same thing when I smelled it.
No, right? It's like, man, it's like fresh oil in there.
Well, it's one of those smells that it's hard to explain. But once you smell it, you're like, right through here, it's dragging material. You know, it's effectively dragging material and starting right at the parting line.
Yep.
So this main is in trouble. These other marks, like this stuff here, this one's starting to get after it. See how it's got some wiping through there, but this one, this is distressed. Like this leads to failure. Because what will happen is it'll pick that material up and then feed it to the rod bearings.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could get if you have a rod bearing failure, you have to go back and look at the mains because the mains are the ones feeding the rods. The rods aren't getting oil on their own. The oil goes through the main into the rod. small amount of time, you know, to do it while you have it apart. But if you don't do it, you get problems. So let me just get a shot of this. This is the back of the crank, and you see that hitting. This is from flywheel coming loose and vibrating. So the marks that we have on the front of the crank and the marks that we have on the back of the crank are, you know, based in vibration. I'd have a hard time answering what happened here, guys. Look at that. Okay.
Yeah.
With how new that is, that could be during this failure because the crank is getting forced around. Because this little bit of particulate that comes off of your fingertip, that's not going to stick around on the engine for a long time. So this damage probably happened during the rod breaking. Do you each want to get a shot of this? Or the rod.
What's left of it?
You have the pin in the top of the rod. So just broken the beam. So the rest of this stuff is in the pan. And then you have the piston, which we can knock out. Which you kind of have to ask, because the rod can break. You can break a rod if you seize a pin, too. So you want to look at the pin bore and see how much damage is going on, and look at the pin and see how much damage is going on. If you had a lot of galling in the pin bore and the pin was hot, then the pin can seize and pull the bottom of out of the piston. But in this case, this stuff looks pretty good. So what you have is it just broke the rod in the middle of the beam. Yeah, and you can see it here. Look at the area of the rod that didn't get beat up against other stuff. See how you can see how it's mechanically separated. It's pulled apart because this area is all stretched.
Yeah.
You know, it basically just it's a tensile failure.
Right. I just pulled apart.
Yeah. But you can't be mad at it. It was grossly overused. You know.
Yeah.
Everything has its limit.
Even that oil squirter got empty cut.
Well, the whole
Poor little guy.
the oil galley is gone. This is the oil
Yeah.
galley that feeds the engine, so that's just gone. So that's why I said
It's all
I'm glad
fire.
that you didn't have a fire
Yeah.
because you have all that oil just now being
Going
pumped
out.
out on the header.
Yeah. No, that was a lot of smoke, but nothing crazy.
Yeah, it's almost worth it. Looking at a failure like this, it would be worth it to have a shield on that side of the engine. That way, when it broke, the oil would just go down
Well,
into a
straight
trash
down.
pan instead of on the header. Because you've been through it. You were sitting at the end of the track, and
Yeah.
nobody was helping you.
That I actually put on the night before I went that plastic cover, and a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
I had a buddy that wrecked his car. Actually, I loaded it up and just a rear tire car and spun out.
That's
So that's immediately what's gonna happen if you don't catch it. Any oil goes in there, boom, they're gone.
it's you know, it's one of the things
Scary,
like
huh?
it's a compounding problem, you know. So all right, flip it back over and let it drain some oil out. And if you want to take this thing home, we'll put it in the back of your truck and you can keep your trophy.
Should be lighter now.
What?
Should be lighter now.
Well, kind of in closing, what you have to, you being the owner of the vehicle, you're making the calls on what risks you're willing to take for the glory. And, you know, like you said, well, let's try this. And you found a window that the engine lived well in, and then you went above that window, and then you went above that window even more, and you found a catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're a grown man, you took known risks, you had a lot of fun at one power level, and then you got greedy, and this happened. So, you know, it's on you.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, you made a decision, you gambled, and you lost. But you didn't wreck your car, it didn't catch on fire. You know, you probably met a new friend, a lot of new friends throughout it. Like, we probably wouldn't have crossed paths if you weren't out being brave.
Yep.
So it is what it is, you know? That's cool. We'll get you another engine, and you get back to playing.
Yep.
So what is your, where do you go from here? You're gonna get another engine. Are you stopping at a 7685? Are you progressing into something more? Like, where do you see this going now?
So actually, I was having this conversation like a week ago. So I talked a lot to Matthew, which is Lance's son.
Okay.
And he's like, man, I want 1300 on boost. So he was, oh, you're not. I don't think you'll be able to make it with a 7685. You might need to. You should call Pedro and get that 83. He said.
I've done 1340 on a 7685.
I mean, if it's possible, that's just the number. If it's just like 1250, 300, that's I'll be good.
It's a funny window to be in between those two turbos, because my experience was a 7685. If you look at the Gen 2 stuff, the compressor wheel, its design, the speed at which it's efficient at, my 7685 ran better at, say, 35 or 40 pounds than my 8385.
Okay.
But once I nudged into the 8385 more and got to like 45 pounds, it started to get really fruitful.
Yeah.
And then I turned the knob a little bit more, and at 50 pounds, it was pretty magical. I mean, it was really running well. So, but at that 50-pound mark with the 8385, here you are, you know, above 1500 horsepower, and you have to accept a different set of compromises, because then what do you have for a fuel system? What are you using for fuel? How often are you going to run the car that hard? How well does this deck keep shape, you know, to have good head gasket retention? You know, what's traction like? Because when my car made 1500 wheel, it was not nearly as fun as 1200, because you had to be going 150 miles an hour. Unless, you know, I just had triple eights on my car. Maybe it would have been better with a big drag radial. Yeah. But I didn't want a big drag radial because you can't get caught in the rain on them. So you gotta pick your battles. Yeah, you just have to pick your battles.
Dude, we just had all these conversations driving up here.
The hardest thing about these conversations is you have them, and then when your inner 14-year-old gets churning, you forget that you got to a logical place when you knew what you're going to do, because then the party starts again and you go back to partying. Yeah. I've been through it, man. Gio's the worst about that. Gio's like, you get him into this place of, you know, content. Like, this is pretty good. And then a few minutes later, he's like, let's party a little harder. So, it is what it is.
What's up, guys? I want to close out the video by personally thanking Jay and Gio from Real Street. Great guys. Jay's knowledge on the 2J platform is just phenomenal. It's on another level. I hope this video proved to any doubters that it was a true short block with Toyota parts. If you guys haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Turn on your notifications. We're going to be picking up the motor from Real Street on the next video and going over the specs. So don't miss out, guys. Thank you guys, like always, for the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Good night.